Hello, everyone. Welcome to MSQ webinar. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. David Fajgenbaum, and so he's very unique to our webinar because he's not come from the biotech entrepreneur or the executive, but his story is very inspiring. So David is an assistant professor in translation medicine and human genetics, and is also the associate director of their Orphan Disease Center at the University of Pennsylvania. He's the top 1% youngest grant awardees of a leading NIH grant. He is also founding director of the Center for Study and Treatment of Castleman disease and co-founder and executive director of the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. Davis have won more awards than can be counted. I think if we continue, probably we will spend hours talking about his achievement. He listed on the Forbes 30 and 30 in healthcare and profiled in the Good Morning American, CNN, Today Show, Science, and the New York Times cover story. While he was making so much achievement, actually, can you believe he has been fighting with the disease, and he has been so close to death 5 times, but he never give up. He keep fighting, not only for himself, but also for all the patients. Based on his own experience, he wrote his book, Trace My Cure, a doctor's race to turn hope into action. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate that kind introduction. Really glad to be here today.
I'm so honored to have you. Actually, every time I watch your interview and the book, just make me like a feel with appreciation, and to have your human being like you, never give up, and also is fighting so hard. And I think you have super talent. So I'm so glad that we can have you today and share with the Chinese audience of your very unique personal story.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled too.
Yeah. So David, do you mind just maybe, I know you have went through the journey actually from you were like a top student and went to all the top school, and I want to show some picture with actually audience from your book, and that is just really show how you went through the from the such the sportsman to get suffering from the disease, and now you go back to their normal life. That's just how amazing. And also now you have been the best seller author of the New York Times, Tracing My Cure, and have the beautiful family with your sweetest daughter. That's a really beautiful story.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate that. It's been quite a journey, and yeah, I'm delighted to share share that journey with all of you guys. So Echo, would you be able to enable screen sharing for me, and then I'll start sharing my screen?
Yes, you can do now.
It says host disabled screen sharing.
Oh, okay. Let me just. I think you should. Okay, could you please try again?
I got it. Thank you. All set. Thank you. Excellent. Well, like I said, thank you guys so much for calling in and joining in, and also for the opportunity to share my story. Today I'll be sharing about my journey chasing my cure and the lessons I learned along the way. Lessons about life from nearly dying, lessons that I think were always relevant, but especially in this time of COVID-19 are really more relevant than ever. So just as was shared, I was training to become I was training to become a physician back in 2010. This is a picture of me when I was in medical school at UPenn, and I decided to go into medicine based on my mom's illness. She was diagnosed with cancer a few years before and passed away. And that motivated me to want to honor her because I was just so devastated by her passing from cancer. And I was in my third year of medical school training to become an oncologist when out of nowhere I became deathly ill. My liver, kidneys, bone marrow, heart, lungs all began to shut down for an unknown cause. I gained 70 pounds of fluid. I went blind in my left eye due to a retinal hemorrhage, and really just fought for my life day to day. I was eventually so sick that my doctors didn't think I would survive. And a priest came in my room and administered my last rites to me. And I've really considered that moment when a priest was in the room preparing me to die to be the start of my overtime. And in overtime, when you think about a sporting event, that's time that you didn't think you'd have, but where every second really counts. And so I wanted to read this passage from Chasing My Cure about overtime. The experience of being in overtime is surprisingly one of intense awareness and scrutiny and clarity. There's a reason for that. When there are only a few seconds left on the board, all distractions disappear and the purpose, victory, becomes clear. The present is only the things around you, and overtime is all present, nothing but present and purpose. So I felt like I've been in overtime ever since I had my last rites read to me. And I know quite a bit about overtime because I played American football in college, and we lost a lot more games than we won, but occasionally we won some games and occasionally we went to overtime. But during college, I also met my girlfriend, Caitlin, and we dated for a few years before I became ill. And we broke up just a few months before I became so sick. And so there I was dying in the hospital. And all I could think about was how much I regretted that I didn't fight for Caitlin and I's relationship, that I didn't push for us to stay together despite the challenges. And when I laid in that hospital bed, I recognized that I didn't regret anything in my life that I had done. The things I regretted were things that I had not done or had not said. And so I vowed that if I were to survive, that I would live by the motto, think it, do it. If I thought of something, I would do it. I would turn my hope into action. And as I mentioned here in the book, it's the absence of memories that you wish you had made and the realization that you'll never get the chance to make them that brings about the most pain, or at least for me, that brought about the most pain. So thankfully, with right around the time that I had my last rites read to me, I was finally diagnosed with idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, and I was given intensive chemotherapy. This is a picture of my dad and I soon after receiving the chemotherapy, and then again on New Year's Eve. And this picture on the right of the screen was actually from when I was had just started to recover after about 5 months, and it was New Year's Eve. So my dad and I decided to take a walk around the hospital floor, and we passed a gentleman who looked like he'd been drinking on New Year's Eve. He was kind of swaying in his chair. And on our next lap, we saw that he'd fallen onto the ground. And so my dad and I, or my dad in particular, rushed over to him and helped him back into his chair. And he looked at my dad and I, and he said, "Thanks so much. Good luck to you and your wife." And we were kind of confused what he meant by wife, but I looked at my belly due to all of the kidney and liver failure, and I had a huge belly, and I realized that he thought that I was my dad's pregnant wife, which was a low point emotionally for both of us, but we laughed so hard. And I think that this gets to the next lesson I want to highlight about how powerful humor can be during tough times. Facing my horrible moments with laughter was just as fundamentally a rejection of Castleman's dominion over me as anything else I was doing. It cleared my mind. It stiffened my resolve. It was entirely up to me to determine what was and what wasn't funny. Perhaps most important, humor is social. For me and my family, there was never a better way to reset our collective resolve than laughing together. And here's a picture of me when I got out of the hospital, and you can maybe see how someone could have confused me as a pregnant woman. And as you saw earlier, a picture of me from my college football days. And I always say this is the worst before and after picture. But if we could flip the order, I think it could be a great advertisement for Peloton or for Muscle Milk. And then I took a picture every week for the next 8 weeks after I got out of the hospital. And you can see my hair starting to grow back, the fluid going away, and I look a little bit less like a pregnant woman by the end. And when I got out of the hospital, I immediately reconnected with Caitlin. I had regretted that I hadn't fought for our relationship before I got sick. And thankfully, she wanted to get back together as much as I did. And so we started dating shortly after I got out of the hospital. This is a picture of us on Halloween. And she was just my supporter. This is her on one shoulder while I got treatment infused in treatment on my other arm. When I came back to Penn, I was able to get involved in the Orphan Disease Center. Orphan diseases are rare diseases that are often neglected. And so I got involved in helping to advance research. And unfortunately, in the midst of that effort, I relapsed and I nearly died for the fourth time from my disease. And you can see this picture, my head is bald from chemotherapy. And right around this time, I promised my family that I would dedicate the rest of my life, however long that may be, to trying to identify a treatment and maybe even a cure for Castleman disease. So I started conducting laboratory research and started a foundation called the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. This gets to lesson number 4, and that's to turn hope into action. For years, I had been hoping that some drug would save my life. And finally, I realized that if I wanted to live, if I wanted a future, I would need to turn my hope into action. Hope cannot be a passive concept. It's a choice and a force. Hoping for something takes more than casting out a wish to the universe and waiting for it to occur. Hope should inspire action. And when it does inspire action in medicine and science, that hope can become a reality beyond your wildest dreams. Back in 2012, there was very little research, very little dollars had gone into Castleman's research. There was very little organization in place to try to advance research for Castleman disease, no diagnostic criteria, no treatment guidelines on how do you treat the disease, and the disease had no FDA-approved therapies, so no drugs that were known to work, but there was one drug in development. Unfortunately, the only drug in development did not actually work for me, and so I was basically out of options. This is a photo of Kazuo Yoshizaki, the person who developed the one drug that was approved in Japan at the time, and the one drug that the newest drug in the US is based off of. Kazuo developed this drug based on research that he did, and I had heard that he tested this drug tocilizumab on himself. And so I went to Kazuo and I said, Kazuo, I heard that you tested this drug on yourself to prove that it was safe. And he said, no, I didn't test it on myself. I didn't give it to myself. The nurse, she gave it to me. So Kazuo Yoshizaki was the first person to ever receive this drug called tocilizumab, which actually went on to become a really important drug in the fight against cancer, helping patients with what's called CART therapy to be able to survive a cytokine release syndrome. And more recently, this same drug tocilizumab is being used in the fight against COVID-19. So as I realized how much work was ahead of us, I knew that I couldn't do this alone, and I began to recruit classmates from medical school and from business school to help with pushing forward research. And you can see some of us doing what we call the Castleman flex in this picture. It's based on the idea that this is a Castleman. The disease I have is called Castleman disease. It's named after a doctor, Benjamin Castleman, but we've kind of repurposed this Castleman concept. And we developed this logo, this Castleman logo, and showed it to a bunch of patients. And a couple of weeks later, this showed up on our Facebook profile. So one of our patients had gotten it tattooed on his shoulder, which I always say, if this is not patient engagement, then I do not know what patient engagement is. So we've been able to make a lot of progress. This is our research pipeline that lists out all the studies that are being funded based on CDC and research. You can find that all in one central place on cdcn.org/research. In the midst of our hard work, I graduated from medical school and began business school, and then I relapsed and nearly died for the 5th time. This is a picture of my fiance, Caitlin, and I, hoping that we could make it to my wedding day. And I knew that I wouldn't make it to the wedding day unless I figured out a treatment that could potentially save my life. And so in this screen, I'm highlighting that in Castleman disease, we know the immune system becomes hyperactivated, but we don't know why. And we don't know which immune cells are really the culprit. What's the real problem here? And we don't really know what causes patients like me to get so sick. Our immune system attacks our vital organs, but we don't know why. But from the research I did, I identified that this one particular protein called VEGF and another cell type called T cells were both highly active. And I wondered if there was some sort of drug that could target both VEGF and T cells. And I ran a series of analyses and found out that there is this one particular communication line in the immune system called the Mtor Pathway, and that it is important for T cell activation and VEGF expression. This is a photograph of a normal lymph node looking at the amount of mTOR activation in a normal lymph node, and brown is positive, blue is negative. And you can see that there is a small amount of mTOR activation in this lymph node. And then this is my lymph node, and you can see that there's a tremendous amount of mTOR activation, which led us to believe that maybe blocking this communication line could be effective for my disease. Today marks 76.52 months since my last relapse. I say 76.52 because I know that I can't round up. I don't know if I will relapse tomorrow or how long I will be in remission. So I can't round up, but I also don't round down because we worked really hard for every fraction of a month. The New York Times called this "Doctor Cure Thyself," which I think is a bit of an overstatement. But thankfully, Caitlin and I were able to make it to my wedding day, our wedding day, and get married. And then 21 months ago, we had our sweet daughter, Amelia, who's photographed here. This drug that's saving my life has now been given to a few other patients. These are a couple of patients that have benefited from it. Unfortunately, it has not helped everyone. Lisa and Sergio were very sick when they received sirolimus, and unfortunately, it could not save their lives. And so we continue to fight for patients like Lisa and Sergio and all of these patients photographed here who are battling Castleman disease all over the world. Thankfully, we've been able to make a lot of progress. We raised about $1.5 million, which led to an additional $10 million in external funding. We've received NIH funding. We have one unified research network. We finally have diagnostic criteria and treatment guidelines. There's now one FDA-approved drug. That drug, siltuximab, that blocks interleukin-6, went on to get approval in the US and also in countries around the world. In fact, I believe it's about to receive approval in China. And there's now one drug in development, and that's the drug sirolimus that I'm on. I think that the fifth lesson I want to highlight is that it really takes an army. If this was me working on my own, we would have made about 1/1000th of a percentage of the progress. But thankfully, we had a great team. If we really wanted to turn the tide against Castleman disease, we needed to expand our effort to include more than just those directly affected by it. More people needed to learn about it so it wouldn't continue to be one of the most deadly, most common diseases that most people have never heard of. And so this is one of the reasons why I wrote Chasing My Cure, to try to raise awareness about Castleman disease. These are a few photos from some of the early awareness about Chasing My Cure. And I think I even have a photograph in here. This is actually a Chinese newspaper that shared the story of Chasing My Cure. And you can see that, that it was able to get some really good awareness and continues to raise awareness for Castleman disease. So this figure is trying to show that there are about 10,000 known human diseases. And of those 10,000 known human diseases, about 1/4 of them have a drug that is FDA approved for them. And so our work is trying to figure out, are there any old drugs that could be used in new ways? So this is a cartoon of an old dog reading a book about new tricks. And I think that's what we really need. And it's something that we're really trying to do, is understand drugs that can be repurposed, but also to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel. And in doing so, we're partnering with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to really be able to accelerate both collaborative research, but also drug repurposing. And a few months ago, we decided to get involved in the fight against COVID-19 with a project that we call Repurpose. It's also called the Corona Project, where we've been going through the full medical literature to extract out data on all of the published cases of COVID-19, place them into a centralized open source database. And we now have a paper in press based on that research, looking at all of these available drugs that could maybe be repurposed against COVID-19. And so I really just want to close by thanking you guys for listening to my story. And I hope that you guys will become part of this army. I hope that you will help us to continue to raise awareness about Castleman disease, about Chasing My Cure, and about the work that we're doing. I've got a few links here that I hope that you guys will share far and wide. And I hope that Chasing My Cure can be an inspirational source for many people, especially in China. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, David, for such a wonderful sharing. And so we received, so we are now open to the Q&A. So audience, you can submit your questions through the chat or through our WeChat group. And so here's one question they asked it. So she said, do you have any of the collaboration with China now?
Yeah, so there's one researcher in particular that I work with quite a bit. His name's Lu Zhang. He's at Peking Union University in Beijing, and he is a terrific researcher, physician. There's also Dr. Dong that I work with, and lastly Raymond Wong in Hong Kong. So there's three wonderful physician scientists that I collaborate with, but we're always eager and interested for more collaborators. Um, so I would be thrilled and delighted if there are others that may be interested in working with us.
Yes. So the follow-up question is, so what kind of the just like exactly like organization you are looking for, and how can they collaborate with you?
So we are laser focused on trying to understand what drugs could be effective against COVID-19 and what drugs could be effective against Castleman disease. And so our primary focus is Castleman's, but as you know, we've recently shifted some focus towards COVID. So I think that what we're looking for are potential collaborators that would either be interested in performing some of these experiments like serum proteomics or genomic studies, or contributing samples towards our research. So if there are samples that have been collected from patients that could be made available for research, that would be terrific. There's also funding that can be made available to be able to help to make this research possible. So I think it's between doing the studies, providing samples for the studies, providing funding for the studies are probably the three best ways that a group can support. And then just generally raising awareness about Castleman disease and about chasing my cure is a great way and great something that anyone can do.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's very clear. And so do you mind to share your progress on the COVID-19? We know like in US actually have been very urgency of the reopen the economy. And
Yes.
in China actually, it's how amazing we can see that they'll go back to normal
Yep.
gradually. And so of course the treatment I think is probably the key, and also the vaccine, right, for us
Yes.
to be comfortable to go out and to work as back to the normal if we could.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everyone around the world, we're all waiting for that vaccine that's effective and safe that will, as you said, help us get back to our normal life. In the meantime, we really need to identify and evaluate all of the available drugs to see if any of them are effective against COVID-19. There are a number of drugs that have already been tried. Many of these first tried in China, now being tried in other locations, like tocilizumab, that drug I mentioned earlier that Kazu developed. These drugs are being tried, and some of them seem to be having an effect. None of them are having a striking effect. They all seem to have a modest effect against the virus. But what I'm hopeful for is that if we continue to identify drugs with a modest effect against the virus, either combination therapies or finding the right drug for the right patient, can help us to get closer to what we're looking for, which is where if you get a very bad case of COVID-19, that there are treatments for you that are going to effectively help to save your life.
Okay. So what are your focus on is repurpose, right? Repurpose the current, the drugs who are already report can see the COVID-19, and you hire the volunteers. I saw, read from your website, and the volunteers will to do more the study to see if they can repurpose the drugs. Do you
That's
mind
right.
to share more about the repurpose? Because I think you also mentioned about your own treatment, repurpose the drugs. I think that is very amazing how you can shorten the R&D time and take the drug off shelf to reuse it.
You're absolutely right. So drug repurposing, in my opinion, is one of the greatest opportunities we have in medicine to help patients in the short term. Obviously, we need to develop new drugs, absolutely. But in the meantime, before these new drugs are available, using existing drugs in new ways, I believe, is one of the most important things that we can do. And there are different ways you can repurpose. You can repurpose a drug that's approved for one condition and try it in another condition. You can take a drug that's not yet approved for anything, and maybe it went through studies and it's just sitting on a shelf in some pharmaceutical company. And you can think about ways that that drug could be used. You could think about reformulating that drug to make it safer or more effective in some way. But the basic concept, as you and I were discussing before this, that is so important is that these drugs have already been developed. There's the effort has gone into getting them there. For many of them, we already know how they work. So if we can figure out a new use for them, that's going to cost much less than if we have to develop a new drug from scratch. So the concept is really clear. Execution is actually much more difficult because there are very few incentives that exist once a drug is already approved for one condition to be able to show that it's effective for another condition. And so we, through the Repurpose project, we're basically going through thousands of published papers to identify examples of drugs being used against COVID-19. And this is, in my opinion, a really important step. You have to systematically track what's being used. But unfortunately, for most diseases, not like COVID-19, there's much, much less repurposing that goes on. Whereas right now, the whole world is trying to find a solution for COVID-19.
Yes, exactly. And I'm not so sure if that's a fair question to ask you. And so for the repurpose the drug, what's the clinical trial pathway? It will be like a similar to their what they do, like if they repurpose the drug to another indication, do they need to go through the similar, the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, the pathway, or they have the faster track?
Great question. So it's typically a faster track to get a new indication. It really depends on your local health authority as to what the guidance is going to be on what steps you have to take. But generally, if you can show safety with phase 1 and whatever your primary indication is, as long as the secondary, the new indication is similar enough to the primary, the first disease that you got approval for, you generally will not need another phase 1 safety study. If it's a similar enough disease, similar enough dose, you usually don't need that initial study. You can move forward to what would be called the phase 1/phase 2 or even phase 2 study. We can just ask the question, is it effective? Of course, you need to also track the safety profile to make sure that it's not harmful in this new indication. But generally, you can get a drug that's already approved for one thing, approved for another indication, generally, especially if it's a rare disease, off of just a large, well-done clinical trial. If it's a more common disease, you might end up having to do a phase 1 study as well, and maybe even a phase 3. But for a more rare disease, at least in the US, the path to a secondary indication is much easier than a primary indication.
Okay, so it means if that is already actually safety is already approved, then they can go to the phase 2 directly, and also the real disease pathway is also in the fast track. So like
That's right.
Most of the case, probably only the phase 2 can get the product to the patient.
That's right.
That's amazing.
And the other thing to consider too is that if it's already approved for the primary indication, you may do if you do one really well done study, let's say it's not good enough for the regulatory body to approve it because they say, well, you still need to do additional studies. If you do a well done study that shows efficacy, then here in the States, a lot of doctors will just start prescribing that drug for the new indication, even though it's not approved for the new indication. It's approved already for one thing. And so a lot of doctors here in the States will say, it's approved for disease X, but you just did a great clinical trial to prove that it works for disease Y. I'm just going to write the prescription for this drug to be used for disease Y, even if it hasn't yet gotten approval for Y. So that also happens quite a bit. I'm not familiar with how much off-label drug use is done in China, but I can say here in the States that that's done quite a bit.
Yes. So I think in China, actually, I think in the past few years, Chinese government have been pushing this direction to call more attention and under like a real disease development. So they have provided more the incentive to encourage the biotech company, pharmaceutical company in China to develop the treatment for the real disease. But I think it's still long way ago. So that's why I really appreciate you come to our webinar to share such the personal experience and more like make more the impact on this area. So we just the follow-up question about the repurpose the drug. There's audience trying to understand better what's your organization like strategy for this one. Do you now? I think you're at a stage like just do the analysis of all the paper and a variable data to do the analysis, but do you also recruit the patient and do the clinical trial? And how far do you want to go to?
Great question. So we've decided that the best place that we can be in to make the most impact is to utilize the data that's already being published. So we go through PubMed and we go through every single paper that's listed. Right now we've reviewed over, I think it's over 8,000 papers. And so it's a single person looking at the paper to assess if it's likely that there's a drug being used to treat a patient with COVID-19 in it. If so, they read through the full paper and they extract out data on what drug was used and whether it resulted in an improvement or not. Unfortunately, most of these studies are not, unless they're clinical trials, they're not always they don't report out the same results across every report. So you get different endpoints depending on which paper you read. So it's actually quite difficult to pull the data together and to analyze across studies. But what we've decided to do is to really just inventory all the drugs that are being tried, how frequently have they been tried, and to get any sort of a sense for what's working and not, and to make that publicly available. So anyone can go to cdcn.org/corona, cdcn.org/repurpose. You go there and you can find this listing of all drugs, and you can find the citations for where it came from. So it's, in my opinion, it's tracking what's been given, but then it's not going as far as saying we're going to do the trials. It's saying we're going to track what's given, we're going to make it publicly available, and then hope that the right people go on to take it forward to a trial.
Okay. So it's kind of like, I think the next stage after you do all the analysis is maybe the biotech company, they can take the data and they can,
Absolutely.
right? So,
Yeah, I'd be thrilled for companies to use the data however they want. It's free and openly available. Anyone who wants to use the data, take it, move forward with a trial. That would be great.
yeah. Do you have one case happen already?
Say that again?
Is any such the case happening?
You know, it's funny. We don't know because it's freely and openly available. And so we don't know how many people are using it, who's used it. I do know that when we moved one of our tabs somewhere, and almost immediately someone reached out to us and said, hey, we were using that tab for something. And so we know it's being used. We just don't know, I don't know how many companies or researchers have used the data in this database to make a decision about going forward or not going forward with a trial.
Oh, that would be amazing if
Yeah,
they can tell you, and
I
you can,
know. We need to start digging into that.
yeah, the value. I think definitely that should be the next step
Yes.
to tracking all the data. And so there's a very personal question. They ask her, how long did you take from the, you made a joke about a pregnant woman when you were sick, to go back to the normal handsome young man?
It was a good question. It was a fairly, I'd say it's all relative. So I don't know if it's slow or fast, but it took me about 3 months to go from looking so sick. Here, I can go back in the slides, back to, had a lot of clicks. So this was just 8 weeks from here to here. And then my hair continued to grow back, and I went, to looking, more like this within, and more like this, within about a year. And so it's pretty amazing how the human body can recover so well, when going through all of that. But it really does require drugs. You need the right medications to turn things around. And if I had not gotten the right medications, then I most certainly would never have improved it. I wouldn't be here today.
So did you do something special? I think that's very amazing to see in such a short time, because even the people recover from the disease, they have some the poster effect, right?
Yes.
But look at you, I cannot believe you have had so much suffering before. And so what kind of treatment and what did you do specially, or maybe yourself?
Yeah, good question. So for me, to get back that first time was chemotherapy really was what saved my life. It was really intensive chemotherapy that's kind of the worst poisons you can ever imagine, but they made me better. They controlled my disease, and I was in a good state of health before I got sick, which I think meant that once the chemotherapy controlled my disease, I think that made it easier to move back into a good state of health. So I think the lesson there is probably, the healthier you are before you get sick with something like that, probably the more quickly you'll be able to recover and return to a state of health. And I think that we're seeing that with COVID-19. People with significant comorbidities before they get sick with COVID-19 are tending to have more severe cases. And so it's, anything you can do to maintain a good state of health, as long as you can, so that way, if and when you do get sick, the recovery is a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm. Actually, you also mentioned in your book and also in the you just in your talk early, you mentioned about actually you kind of like lost try to exhaust all the options for the treatment, and you were kind of like lost the hope, but you started to like self discover the treatment. So what did you do to discover the new treatment for yourself, and what did you discover?
Yeah, so I went through all of the data that I'd been performing laboratory research for about a year before then, and I went through all of the data and tried to search for patterns that would suggest that one drug or another drug could maybe work. The whole time I was doing it, it was always with the idea that hopefully there was a drug out there that could be repurposed to save my life. I knew we couldn't develop a new drug in time, so the hope was that something already existed. And in going through the data, I found this one particular communication line in the immune system called the Mtor Pathway. Mtor is really important for cells to proliferate. It's important for cells to communicate with one another. And so based on the experiments that I ran, I found out that this particular communication line was hyperactivated. This was really turned on. And so I thought maybe blocking it could help my disease, but I didn't know for sure. I mean, in medicine and in biotech, you know very well that a lot of times you'll find that something is very up and then you inhibit it and it doesn't have any effect on the disease. And so this is a case where it was really up, we inhibited it, and it actually has resulted in a very long remission. And I've been doing really, really well for over 6 years.
Wow, that's amazing. So the one audience asked, do you get the patent for the repurpose?
No, you don't. So I take that back. You don't get the patent for repurposing a drug, at least in the case where I did, if the company that developed the drug, well, for two reasons. One, if the company was very broad with what they put on their patent, a lot of times companies will basically put every disease under the sun as a possible use for their drug. So it's broadly covered. The other thing is if you share publicly about your discovery, then it's no longer patentable. And so in my case, I started telling people, there was a New York Times article, I was telling kind of everyone that I could about this drug. And then by the time my university thought about the patenting ability, it was too late because I had been telling anyone and everyone for so long. So no patent on that, even though it was my discovery, I didn't actually protect it.
So this is like a business question, right? So if like you're going to find some repurpose for other drugs, for other medicine. So if you patent it, and then I think that you can sell to the biotech company, then you can know how if they are going to develop them or not. Do you think that will be the next step for your organization?
Yeah, it's a really good idea. It's a good point, because I do think that there's certainly really important reasons to patent things. I think intellectual property is important for innovation and pushing forward drug development. For COVID-19, we have not been thinking about it from that perspective. We've really been thinking about making it freely available, because it does feel like there's such an urgency right now, but it's something we should think about. I think it's a really good point, and it's definitely something we should think about.
Yeah, I think it's also like a motivation, right, for the company to put more the fund and develop.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's a great incentive. No, you're absolutely right, because without the patent protection, then the incentive's gone. And so I'm certainly pro intellectual property protection. But in our case, thus far, we haven't been doing that.
So there's more question about the Castleman disease. So they ask you, can you share the knowledge of the role HHV8 virus
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
Castleman disease?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a disease called, the disease is Castleman disease, and that really describes four separate diseases within it. There's what's called unicentric Castleman disease, where you have a single enlarged lymph node, and those patients do really well with surgery. Then there are three forms of multicentric Castleman disease. One form of multicentric Castleman disease is caused by this virus, human herpes virus 8. It actually causes the Castleman disease. Another form of Castleman disease is caused by a form of cancer called POEMS. And so it can be caused by a form of cancer, it can be caused by a virus. But then the fourth type of Castleman disease is what we call idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, which is where we don't know what causes it. There's no virus and there's no cancer. I have the idiopathic type, the type that's multicentric Castleman disease, but no virus and no cancer. So we don't know, idiopathic meaning we don't know what causes it.
Okay. So it's also did you think about the immunotherapy or gene therapy?
We've thought about immune therapy quite a bit because this is really at its heart an immune system disorder. Castleman disease is a hyperactive immune system, and so figuring out ways to suppress it and modulate the immune system is really important. A number of the drugs that we use in Castleman disease, really they target the immune system, but rather than like immune therapy in cancer where you're turning up the immune system, we actually need to turn down the immune system for Castleman disease. And then as far as gene therapy goes, we're very interested in gene therapy. The problem is we haven't yet identified a genetic alteration that causes the disease. And so if we can figure out the genetic cause, then we'll be, all in on trying to find a gene therapy.
Mhm. So since you funding the Castleman disease collaborative network, what's the progress you have been make, and what do you see the breakthrough for this disease?
Oh, sorry, what was the last one? What do we see? What? The next move?
The breakthrough treatment for this
Oh, okay.
disease.
Yeah, good question. So we've been able to make a lot of progress on a few different levels. The first is just foundational, establishing diagnostic criteria, treatment guidelines, connecting the community. Those sort of foundational pieces are critical to make progress. On the next level, we have been able to begin to really dissect the disease, what's happening on a molecular level in the disease. And then the top level is kind of the goal, and that's new therapies. And so we now have this drug that I'm on, sirolimus, that we have an open clinical trial. Unfortunately, the drug does not work for everyone, so we continue to search for other drugs. We recently discovered and published just in the last couple of weeks another target for a drug called JAK1/2 that we think could be effective to block that for Castleman disease. And so I think that when I think about drug development, I think you have to have the foundational, how does the disease work? What does it look like? To get to the next level of the biology, the cellular underpinnings of what's happening. And the top level, once you have the two foundations, then you can start getting to targeted therapies. And we're really right there where we've got a couple, but I think that now that we've got a strong foundation, we'll have even more of those targeted therapies.
So it sounds like more like a hospital experiment. You will use the drugs on the patients now, right?
That's right. Yeah. So we're doing a hospital. It's a clinical trial where we're giving this drug sirolimus to Castleman's patients.
Okay. So how many patients you have been treating, or how many patients have been involved?
So I'm aware of about 20 patients that have received sirolimus thus far. There may be way more than that out there that have gotten it because, as I mentioned, I've been pretty public with sharing about the drug. I'm aware of about 20, thus far that have gotten the drug.
Mm-hmm. So the 20 patients enrolled, you mentioned about it from your picture. I saw all the patients picture, and I know unfortunately 2 patients passed away, and so is that other 18 patients are treated and successfully?
I wish that it was that high. It's somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 have benefited. About 1/2 have not benefited from the drug, and so there's thousands of patients diagnosed each year in the US with Castleman disease, about 5,000 Castleman's diagnoses per year. And so in this trial, and looking at 20 patients, that's just a small fraction. But just in this first 20, it looks like about 1/3 of them are benefiting. So we've still got work to go.
Okay. And but you are making the progress. That is very amazing. So what's your next step in this area?
So now that we've have such strong foundation, I think the next step is to continue to push for getting insights from the biology towards repurposed drugs, and just continue to push on that. So we're going to keep pushing on trying to identify new drugs, and we're also going to continue to support in the COVID-19 fight any way that we can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because we are over time, and thank you so much. And I will just take a last question.
Sure.
What do you see the real disease treatment development in US? What lessons we can learn from here for the China?
Great question. I think that a big observation I've made in the US, and then I've also seen a trend towards this in China, is the important role for patient advocacy and patient engagement in the drug development process. Here in the US, there are a lot of patients like me and others who have really gotten involved in drug development. So we work with pharmaceutical companies and academic centers and physicians and other advocates, and patients are really very active in the process. I've heard that in China, there's been a trend towards this, where more patient groups are getting involved in drug development. But I think that if we can continue to encourage patients to be a part of the drug development process, I think that helps everyone. I think that it makes doctors better, it makes scientists better, it makes pharmaceutical companies better at what they're doing. But I think it's important to continue to engage with patients.
Actually, what you're just talking about is just, I invited one doctor from China join our webinar tonight. Today actually is Dr. Duan, and he's from China, Hunan Cansha, and he created the group community of the real disease of the patients.
Excellent.
And it's just how amazing, because every time I met him, he is so excited, and also he invited me to be the community, and I can see how the people interact, and the doctor have the direct connection, and just like think about how to treat the patients. That is exactly what you just shared. I just feel exactly, it's kind of like that's who are the end user, right?
Yes, exactly.
You are the creator, like the doctor or the drug developer. I think that's definitely true. Thank you so much for you joining me today, and it's just amazing, and it's really inspiring. I think in the different level, like you're a scientist, and also with a strong business background, the Wharton MBA, and also you are now kind of like the pioneer of the real disease, the promoter. It's just amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hope that this was helpful to everyone watching.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think we learned so much from you, and also how to be a human being, and also how to fight, and also
Yes.
to turn the challenge to be the opportunities, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone joining us today, this morning, and tonight. And also, I think what David just shared is very inspiring and also motivational for us, especially for the real disease. And I know we are still in the process of the COVID-19, and I hope everyone will stay safe. And I think probably we should get out of this situation soon. And so I think just people like David have been fighting for it and bring the treatment to us. So I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone joining me today. Have a great one.
Guys.
Bye.
Great. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. It's very amazing. I hope we will continue the conversation, especially how to translate your book into Chinese.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Let's try to figure out a publisher that we can get to do that. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. Have you been to China?
I have not. I was supposed to go to see my friend Lu Zhang in Beijing. Supposed to go this year at some point, and of course we've canceled those plans just because travel is so hard to do these days. But hopefully we'll do it soon.
Yeah. Do you forecast that we can travel soon?
I hope so. I mean, I think that it's so hard to know. I think there probably will be. Everyone's talking about this second wave. I think that we're all going to go back to normal probably a little too quickly, and I think that there will be a second wave, unfortunately. But I'm hopeful that won't happen.
Yeah. So based on the research your organization is doing, do you think we can find a treatment soon?
I think that I have to say I'm pleased that there are some drugs that are having a modest effect, but I think I was hopeful that by now we would have a couple more kind of home run drugs that are working really well, and we haven't yet found a drug that's the silver bullet, but we're going to keep looking.
The virus is too smart, right?
It's tough.
Unfortunately, yeah. And thanks again for
Yeah,
joining.
thanks so
Have a
much.
great one. I know you are being squeezed out of time of your busy schedule. That's really appreciated to sharing your amazing journey. And this is a challenge, turn the challenges into bigger opportunities.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe.
Yeah, bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.